I imagine at one time you were this brilliant little child. As we enter into adulthood, what was brilliant in childhood can actually get in the way of you living the life you want to live. Hello, friends. I'm Nancy Houston. I want to help you live a better life. We're all emotional creatures who sometimes think. And so it's so important that we make this journey from our heads into the depths of our hearts. Welcome to the In-Between with Nancy Houston. Hi, I'm Nancy Houston, and I am so glad that you are with us today. I have an incredible new guest. He is becoming my new friend. I just got to meet him today. I've heard about him, read about him, listened to some of his story. He's got an incredible story to share with us. And even more than that, he's a genuine, authentic, vulnerable human, which always interests me deeply. So welcome to my guest, Joshua Broome. Thank you for being with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, glad you're here. So where should we begin? Let's jump in and tell us about you, Josh.
So I travel and speak and just finished writing a book, which is exciting. My wife and I, we've been married for about 7 years. We've got 3 boys, a kid on the way, which is really exciting and busy, and we moved to Dallas almost 7 months ago.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a busy, exciting season, but I love where God has me.
Yeah.
I love where God has our family.
So tell us about the book. Is it out? Is it available?
So it comes out March 5th.
Okay.
It's called 7 Lies That Will Ruin Your Life. So really taking the big lies of the world and just leaning into your heart. So your heart actually desires the false promises of the world. You know, Jeremiah talks about your heart's deceitful among all things. So taking what the world says is best and what the Bible says is true, and kind of colliding them together, and injecting some of my personal life experience into that, because I fell hard and learned a lot from it. So just sharing that with others.
Yeah, I love that you do that. We were just talking before we started about how the darkest times of our lives can end up being some of the greatest things that God can do in our lives when we'll give up and say, okay, I surrender. And put me on the potter's wheel, and let's start working this out together. And that's definitely what God's done in your life.
Absolutely, and it's an ongoing process because I feel like there's layers of healing that happen in certain seasons of your life where maybe you weren't prepared to deal with this in some way, or you're going to go a little bit deeper than you've gone in the past, and it's been a heck of a decade, that's for sure.
Oh, I bet it has been. You mentioned that, we were talking about how, now that your story belongs to God, it's been totally transformational for your life.
Absolutely.
But there were times where God didn't own your story.
Yeah.
What was life like before there was that, okay, Lord, I give up? What was life like for you before that time?
Yeah, so there were 2 big seasons of life where I would say my story owned me, and for a large part of my life, the aspect of my story that owned me was that the fatherlessness aspect, where I had a unique relationship with my father, and that my mom had me when she was 16, small town in South Carolina, and then my father was never in my life or in my home, but because it was a small town, he was close enough proximity to me where I would see him, at the grocery store.
I
knew who he was, and we had a few interactions.
Yeah.
But he was never my dad.
Wow.
So as I got older, that it went from confusing to frustration.
Yeah.
Because I saw this person, and it made me feel inadequate. So that aspect of my story definitely, it was the broken lens in which I saw myself, I saw the world, and paired with this high achiever personality, I felt like I needed to overcome. I needed to prove that I was worth something. So I lived my life, on that basis where,
Yeah.
if your high achiever personality drives you to operate in excellence and do good things and do good work, that's great. But if you're doing them, to try to overcome or stack enough good or enough accomplishments, really just like throwing dirt on a wound, it doesn't work.
Well, it's so painful to grow up in the same town where your dad is, but he's not being your dad.
Yeah.
And that can leave such an empty hole in a child's life. I wish dads knew how vital they were.
Yeah.
If there's anybody listening today, I just want to remind all you dads, like, you are so vital to your child's life.
Yeah.
And for their identity formation. And when we can give our children a sense that you belong here.
Yeah.
And we are delighted by you, and you don't have to work
Yeah.
to delight us. You just delight us because you are here.
Yeah.
Then our children can grow up and go out into the world with confidence. But if our children have to prove that they are worthy of being alive,
Yeah.
man, that just can bring so much darkness and vulnerability into their lives.
Yeah.
So did you just have a huge rejection sense inside of you? Or
Yeah,
what?
I mean, it made me feel inadequate.
Yeah.
So I did everything I could to get the affirmation that I thought if I got, that pain would go away. It was almost like it would numb it, but only for a while.
Yeah, isn't that true? Yeah, all the success, all the money,
Yeah.
it doesn't soothe the agony for very long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how we're made by love for love. We're made by God, who loves us dearly, who desires a relationship with us. And when we try to replace the intimacy that we were made to desire and receive because of what Jesus has done for us, and when we try to replace that with counterfeits, it really just augments the way that we think, the way that we act, the way that we perceive things.
Yeah.
And I think it just creates this behavioral and emotional gap in our lives where we're constantly empty and trying to overcome and
Run
achieve.
away.
Yeah. And
Run away from that wound. That wound
anything. I'll do anything but deal with that.
But feel that.
Yeah.
Because that can feel like the worst pain there is.
Sure.
If I were to turn and face how rejected I feel, I might come completely apart.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I'm identifying with your story. My grandmother grew up in the same town as her daddy. He did not want her. And her mother had died, so she was an orphan.
Oh, wow.
And he did not want her. And I think that wound of rejection was passed to me, to my father, and then on to me. And so I hear what you're saying. It can lead you very much into a life of performance.
Yeah.
So how did that affect you, like all this rejection?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even though my mom loved me incredibly well and did so many things for me, we had a good relationship, I feel like I had a really hard time receiving love. So I had a hard time giving love. So there was, every relationship or friendship that I was in, it was pretty transactional, lacked integrity, lacked follow through. I was, throughout high school and college, I was constantly that person that, I'll do that, I'll be there, but I wouldn't show up, where I didn't want to say no to someone, but I didn't want to follow through.
Yeah.
A bad boyfriend, wasn't faithful, wasn't honest, just so afraid of getting hurt. So it was almost like I was masochistic in some way. I would sabotage things intentionally.
Yes, can't we sabotage?
Yeah, and it's so interesting the way, because I did things like that, like as I got older, even in my careers, in the porn industry, I did things like that, where I was like on purpose trying to sabotage myself because I thought it was the only way I could get out of it.
Yeah. How can I ruin this?
Yeah.
And if we've got a lot of rejection and our belief is that I'm unlovable, look at my dad couldn't love me.
Yeah.
So I must be unlovable.
Sure.
And all of us love our belief systems to be validated.
Yeah.
So we will purposely sabotage if somebody actually does like you or love you and they're moving towards you,
Yeah.
then we'll automatically sabotage it because that doesn't fit with my belief system
Yeah.
that I'm unlovable.
Yeah.
It's incredible how we can do that to ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's almost like you can't see what you're doing
No.
until after the fact.
That's right.
And that's when you feel the pain of it. Like you feel the
Yeah.
pain of what you did to yourself
Yeah.
after the fact, because you're just operating in, you know, this subconscious insecurity.
Yeah. Yeah. How long did it, I mean, even after, then later on you became a Christian.
Yeah.
So how long did it take to get rid of some of that self-hatred and that I'm unlovable and the shame that comes along then with the decisions that have been made to push love away?
Yeah. I would say when I experienced God's love for the first time, I was able to understand the distinction between lust and love. And really anything else, like any other counterfeit. For me, I remember like when I heard the gospel for the first time, when I truly heard the gospel for the first time, I just met this girl, and when I met this girl, I told her essentially how bad I was, you know, and like listed off every bad thing, told her, you know, about my time in the industry, like all these things.
Yeah.
And her response was, well, the worst thing you've ever done doesn't define who you are. And the greatest thing you've ever done, guess what? That doesn't define who you are either.
I so want to meet your wife.
Yeah,
she became your wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what, like, she was Jesus with skin on in that moment.
Yeah.
Saying to you, Josh, your previous life does not define you.
Yeah, she was saying there's a creator of all things, including you, and you don't get to define yourself. Wow. Your feelings might, you know, attribute to how you see yourself, but your feelings are fickle.
Wow. What kind of world would we live in if more Christians had that kind of a response?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not afraid of your past.
Yeah, and I think the way that she responded, you know, I love like Colossians 4. It talks about, you know, there's so many aspects of it. You know, you got Paul in prison talking about being grateful, and he's talking about having self-awareness and talking about walking in wisdom towards outsiders, and you know, your speech being gracious and knowing how you ought to answer each person, and just really, I think it's really easy to say the right thing, but it's not always easy to respond in the right way.
No.
And often our response is more powerful than what we say.
Well, you know, they say even our response to trauma, what our story is about what happened to us, is more important than what happened to us.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So
you're in this very, I mean, I as a sex therapist, I believe that the porn industry is an industry of sexual trauma and abuse.
100%.
Right? So was there some of that in your history before you got into the industry? Was there some, I mean, obviously you're born into sort of, it's a trauma, I think, when a child doesn't have a daddy that wants him.
Yeah, so there were certain aspects of my childhood that were traumatic. So not having a father, and then at the age of 7, my mom got married, and very quickly he was very abusive to her, like hard drugs. Like I remember when I was like 9 or 10 years old, like looking out into our driveway, and he was siphoning gas out of her car into a gas can to put into his car, and just like being confused.
Oh my gosh.
And just like her, like there's a specific memory that I have that I'd repressed that came to, you know, that I'd remembered not too long ago. But I remember like when they would fight, he would push like a dresser up against the door. And I remember like pushing with my forearm, like at the door, like trying to get the dresser out of the way. And I felt like that, like I couldn't go protect my mom. So that definitely like impacted me in a lot of ways.
I think that is some of the worst trauma for a sweet little boy who loves his mama
Yeah.
And he feels so unable to protect her. And he feels so, it can lead to so much hopelessness and
Yeah.
powerlessness.
Yeah.
And that's devastating.
Yeah.
To know that your mother is being abused on the other side of that door and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. So I think that, and then also like seeking after love and achievement. So like
Yeah.
I saw pornography for the first time when I was 12, 13 years old, and very quickly became very promiscuous.
Yeah.
So didn't struggle with pornography, but was very promiscuous, from 13, 14 years old.
Yeah, you probably lean more into the love addiction side because
Yeah.
you were so love starved,
Yeah.
So yeah, so porn didn't have that hold.
Yeah, but I think when the opportunity to be in porn was presented, even though it was a glaring red flag and obviously not something that I wanted to do, because I didn't pursue being in that industry. I didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah.
But when I was invited into the industry, it wasn't like, this is insane. It's like having sex for money. Didn't sound like, okay, obviously this is not something I want to do. This is something that's bad. This is not a good idea, but it wasn't such a alarming concept that it kept me from doing it.
Yeah. Well, it can give a male a sense of having some power over his own life.
Yeah, and for me, honestly, so when I met with the agent for the first time, he asked me 3 questions. He asked me, how did I grow up? Why was I in LA, and what did I hope to accomplish? And I was like, I grew up just pretty much me and my mom. I want to be an actor, maybe do some modeling, and I want to be famous. And I didn't really want to be famous. What I meant was I want to be known and seen and affirmed is what I wanted.
You really wanted intimacy.
Yeah.
Which is that being known and knowing.
Yeah.
I want somebody to know me and see me.
Right.
Because your dad had never seen you.
Yeah.
He wasn't there to look at you and go, man, I'm proud of you, son.
Oh gosh, like that's the thing. Like 100% of the time, if my wife says, even in a text, if she says anything about being proud of me, it just wrecks me.
Oh, I bet it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet it does. Because you didn't get that filled out.
Right.
And so that can feel like, oh my
And
goodness.
I think it was more, I didn't get that. Like my mom definitely said that, but like I didn't feel like anyone was proud of me.
Yeah.
So it was like not hearing it was one thing, but like not hearing it in a way where it could be true.
Yeah. Well, there's such a difference for what daddies do for their children, what mamas do.
Yeah.
Mamas kind of like nurture and try to protect and create a nest for this beautiful child.
Yeah.
And so your mom worked really hard at that.
Yeah.
And dad is there to call forth,
Yeah.
you into your own personhood. And so if you don't have a dad doing that, it can leave you with so much confusion and vulnerability. And I think it's so interesting that man asked you 3 questions, like, what's your background?
Yeah.
He was seeing if you would be a good candidate.
Sure.
And if you're a fatherless child or you come from trauma, then you're a great fit for more trauma.
Sure.
It just breaks my heart how traumatized children are oftentimes re-traumatized over and over and over.
Yeah. I mean, especially when I got into the porn industry, it was like 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
So what was a very common occurrence would be either someone that had been sexually abused that ended up, with someone that was essentially prostituting them.
Yeah.
And then they found out that, okay, like they could introduce them into the porn industry and they're taking all their money. Yeah. There would be guys that would show up to set with this girl and then the check would go to him. Oh. And then like the thing that it was just so crazy because it happened time after time after time back in the day of MySpace. in Craigslist where there would be modeling shoots that girls would come to, and they would do a photo shoot, and then the photographer would say, take off a little more, a little more, a little more. And then when the girl had taken off enough, and she's like, I don't feel comfortable anymore, the photographer would say, well, I've already got pictures of you doing that, and you've already signed the release. So if you want to get paid, you need to keep going. And then that happens, and once that happens, there's that that scarlet letter, emotionally and literally, where it's like they almost use it as ammunition, where like, this is already out there, it's not going to go anywhere, everyone's going to know this, you might as well keep doing it.
Oh, there's so much blackmail and manipulation.
Yeah, but it's almost like, because it's true, like one compromise in your life will bleed over into compromise in every area of your life.
Yeah.
And they almost use that, twist that knife against you.
Yeah.
And for me against myself.
Yeah.
Because I was like, okay, once I had done one, I was at a crossroads where I did my first film.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of people found out about it. I had representation in the mainstream modeling world, and I had an acting agent. And both of those, it's like, hey, there were moral obligations that we need you to adhere to, because we can't be associated with your likeness in this way. So, you're fired. We can't represent you anymore. And that happens, and then my mom, finds out from my uncle. Someone shared with my uncle. It's like, I think I saw, Joshua in a porn movie, and then my mom asked me about it, and I wasn't going to lie to her.
Yeah.
And then after that happened, I'm at this crossroads where I obviously I can't continue doing what I was doing, and that I can't continue modeling and acting. So and it's easy to believe, well, there's nothing else I can do, so I have to do that.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And it's so much easier to do that. It's so much easier to continue compromising.
Yeah.
Especially when you get caught, it's like, well, I'm just going to do this.
Well, it's like so many who, I think kids who sometimes are raised in church in a strong purity movement can believe, like, if they do experience a sexual trauma or they go too far, it's like, well,
this is who I am.
I've lost my virginity, so I might as well just...
Yeah.
I mean, our brains can work that way, can't they?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Oh, my goodness. Where shame just takes over the narrative.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you did this thing.
Yeah.
And now the other industry has abandoned you.
Yeah. And it's just the level of manipulation that happens in the industry. Just for example, when a girl or anyone gets in the industry, they have a no list of like, I don't want to do like certain things.
Yeah.
And the trajectory of someone's career, it's like they'll start and they won't do those things, and then they'll become popular, and then their popularity will start to dissipate, and then the agent will go to studios and say, hey, how much would you give me if this girl did this?
Oh, wow.
Okay, finds the highest bidder, and then comes to the girl and uses this manipulative script saying, hey, out of nowhere, the studio wants to offer you $50,000 if you do that thing that you said you wouldn't do. But if you do it, you'll be relevant again. You'll be popular again. And then they do it, and all of a sudden the thing that they've never done, they've done.
Yeah.
And now it's just something else they do. And then once those things are all stripped away, the phone stops ringing, and I've got 30 people. I've been out of the industry a little over 10 years, and I've got 30 people who've taken their own life.
Oh,
and a lot of it's that, like, I believe, my behavior is my identity.
Yeah.
I'm a sex worker. That's who I am. That's all I'm good for. And then you go through this, I do the escorting, I do the stripping, I do the porn, and then all of a sudden, I can't provide for myself because my phone's not ringing anymore.
Yeah.
And if that's 100% tied to my worth, And I've had a group of people surrounding me for years telling me this will always be who I am, and no one will want me outside of that because I did these things. You know, you'll never get married, you'll never do this, you'll never do that. You know, no one will ever take you seriously. So if this is the only path my life has and this is over,
Yeah.
like the end of the tunnel looks pretty dark.
Yeah. My life might as well be over.
Yeah.
And then you get a lot of that suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
It's such a grooming process.
Yeah.
Like this industry groomed a young man like yourself.
100%.
And these young women that you're talking about, they're grooming them and they keep upping the ante,
Yeah.
right?
And it's like when you live that way, I mean, I did things in that industry that I never would have done if I wouldn't have exposed myself to certain things. You know, like, you know, there would be people who would hire me to like bartend shirtless or whatever. And,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't think anything of it because like you get to a point where if there's a check involved, like everything's fair play.
Yeah,
Like
all
nothing
it
matters.
starts revolving around that.
Yeah.
Instead of the beauty and sacredness of your body,
Right.
right? Like we're body creatures by God's design, and I
Yeah.
think we can have so much shame and hatred for our bodies
Sure.
instead of like, this body is God's indwelling. He loves it. He made it. He indwells into this body.
Yeah.
It's such a counter message to the body shaming and sexual shaming
Yeah.
that most people grow up on, you know?
100%.
Yeah. So understanding that sometimes learning to love our bodies can kind of be the last frontier of some of our transformation
100%.
because there's been so much shame wrapped up in all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How's that journey been for you?
It was interesting. So after I got out of the industry, and then especially like when I started following Jesus, and I had you know a great relationship with God, and I'm starting to grow and things like that. I'm working in the health and fitness space, and I become very fit, which goes along with you know aesthetics.
Yep.
And then you know I start struggling with you know I wanted to look a certain way, but for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And then wrestling with that, like, is it okay, you know, to do certain things or to look a certain way or care too much about these things?
Yeah.
And because of my past experience, like, you know, my looks or aesthetics or all these things were always tied to something that was bad that caused me a lot of shame. And it's like it was something I struggled with for a really long
Oh, I
time.
bet. How confusing trying to integrate all these messages that
Yeah.
you've received,
Oh, sure.
knowing that your mother's body's being beaten. Did you know her pregnancy story?
Not fully.
Not fully.
Yeah.
You know, that's
And it was-
so interesting when we don't know
Yeah.
parts and pieces of our own stories. A Swedish study I recently read said that if a father is depressed before even conceiving a child,
Yeah.
it will affect that baby.
Mm.
It affects the father's sperm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so sometimes children are starting out from conception forward with some really difficult challenges.
Oh, wow.
You know, like, wow, you mean my father's state of mind could have had a huge effect on even how I felt about myself when I came out of the womb.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That's incredible.
You know? And so I wish we talked way more about male depression,
Yeah.
because I think my father was traumatizing because he had so much PTSD and suffered from depression. But there was no outlet for him
Yeah.
to get help or to talk about it.
I think even more so long ago, but even still today, there's this
Stigma.
Yeah, stigma with, especially like with men, saying,
Yeah.
you know, it's like you're supposed to man up, you
Oh,
know,
all the time.
and that's like the fruit of my mental and emotional health is, I mean, yes, like some counseling, but like also like relationships that I have in my life.
Yeah.
Our buddy Tim Ross, we use similar language in that, like I like from 6-7 years ago, I always wanted someone in my life that I could have hot conversations with, so honest, open, transparent.
Yeah.
And for me, like having the relationship where like I'm going to be honest with you, and you're actually going to hold me accountable,
Yeah.
and then accountability looking like, man, why did you do that? You said you didn't want to do this. It's taking you in a direction that you said you didn't want to go. Let's figure out, like, why did you say yes to that thing?
What's happening inside of you?
Yeah, instead of like they're not being like overly condemning,
Right.
but properly convicting.
Right. Like, hey, I see you and I love you enough to say, hey, buddy, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a path that is good for you.
Yeah, and then at the same time, be encouraged.
Yeah.
As well.
Like, I love you.
Yeah.
And so what's this really about?
Yeah.
What's really going on?
Yeah.
You know, like with my own husband, I'll sometimes when we're in bed and the lights are out, I'll just put my hand on his heart and say, hey, buddy, what's going on inside of there?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he can just get lost in his head all day long.
Sure.
And I'm like, are you checking in with this? Because this, yes, you mentioned this scripture earlier. Yes, our hearts can be deceitful.
Yeah.
And our hearts are precious.
Yeah. 100%.
And we're meant to, above all else, guard these precious, beautiful things. And, you know, we're emotional creatures who sometimes think.
Yeah.
And so we love to think, and I think especially our Christian world's made up of this, we love to think that if we get our thinking right, we're going to be right.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, if it were oh so easy.
Yeah.
If we could just be such cognitive creatures.
Yeah, I think we focus way too much on obedience and discipline, and we don't focus enough on self-awareness, because you can't be disciplined or obedient until you're self-aware.
Well, and I know for me, like I was 32 when I started facing my history.
Yeah.
It took me that long. And it took a full day of crying. And I tried to make it my, like, honey, are you okay? I kept saying to my husband that day, like, are you okay? He's like, I'm great. And I'm like, this really needs to be you, not me. Like, these feelings I have cannot be my own, because I think this will kill me if I have to face my history.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to drown me. It's going to be too much. It's going to be too awful. I cannot do this. And I'd just been running and kind of fake it till you make it.
Right.
You know, until that day of reckoning. And wow, it's like so painful to face our histories and so redemptive. But I remember one of my first realizations was like, I know Jesus and I trust you, Jesus, but I think God is a Father in heaven who's got a lightning bolt in his hand. And if I'm not completely in line and obedient, right, and doing it all right, you know, checking all my boxes, that he's going to strike me.
Yeah, that's why I love like John 14:15. It talks about that. If you if you trust me, you obey me. You know, it's.
Isn't it hard to trust a father though when you had an either completely absent, not engaging, or like for me, a man who I loved and admired, and he could be terrifying. And so it's like to trust a father took me. Like God started speaking to me saying, yeah, I want to hear it all. I want you to bring me your worst and see what happens. Like test me, Nancy.
Yeah.
And see what happens when you bring me your worst.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think you can handle it, God. And God's like, oh, let's see. And so I think that's when I came to know God. Like I'd known Jesus like since I was 14, but I don't think I knew God.
Yeah.
Well until my 30s or maybe even 40s, and then started kind of this trust relationship because it was pretty iffy. Trust with a father was like, I don't know about this.
Yeah, because I mean the Bible talks a lot about the intimacy with God, but it being indicative of also having a fear of God.
Yeah.
But the fear of God being a treasure.
Yeah.
So that if you treasure God and you see Him with reverence, the byproduct of that is actually peace and hope and comfort, because
true.
you're seeing your Father rightly.
Yeah.
If you see your Father rightly, you can see yourself rightly.
Oh, there you go. I love that, because I think God wants to give us our God identity.
Yeah.
And God confidence.
Yeah.
You know, and before that, we're just trying to kind of fake it or patchwork some sort of identity and this false confidence. You know, well, maybe if I make this many, or maybe if I succeed here,
That was me,
I'll
yeah.
feel confident.
Yeah.
And we do for, 20 minutes. And then it's like, oh, man.
I love what you were talking about earlier, how, like we're always being renewed, and it's an ongoing process. And, healing is that way, it's ongoing. And for me, when our son was born, our first son was born, we named him Canaan. Canaan in Hebrew means measuring stick. So for us, he was the measure of God's grace.
Wow.
And he's born, and he's like all like slimy and like I don't know what to do. I hadn't really been around kids. I'm afraid and excited. My wife's water broke at 5 a.m. at a CrossFit class, and then we go to the hospital, and she's her water's broke, and she's dilated just enough to stay in the hospital. But it's 24 hours later when she gives birth, so I'm like on edge for 24 hours.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And he's finally born, and he's over there being wiped off, and I walk over, and the nurse is like, well, you can touch him. And I was like, what do I do? So I just reached my hand out, and when I reached out my hand, he grabbed my finger, and like in a real, like not audibly, but like in a real way, I felt God say to me, I love you more than that. And
that's precious.
And I'd seen that child for 30 seconds. He hadn't done anything to earn my love, but I was willing to die for him.
Wow.
In that moment. And then like really, like I had been saved, and I was I understood, but I don't think I had really grasped God's love for me until that moment. And that moment changed me. And I think if we're willing to experience those moments and not run from what they feel like run from those painful things, run from those wounds, God will heal you, and He'll expedite that healing because you were willing to go in that place.
I love that. That is, I totally hear what you're saying. It's that you've gotten the information that God loves you.
Yeah.
And that Jesus died for you, and it's such a sweet and endearing message.
Yeah.
That moment when your baby reaches out, he kind of like knows who his daddy is.
Yeah.
And wraps his fingers around you, which is something you didn't receive with your daddy, and yet here God is redeeming, right? Yeah. This is a transformational moment for you.
Yeah.
Where it's like, that's kind of father I am, Josh.
Yeah.
And that emotion and then that information come together, and it changes your life.
Yeah.
Right? Wow, that's beautiful. How in the world did you go from porn industry to, don't you have like a degree in theology or something? Or
biblical theology.
How, tell me about this bridge.
How long you got?
No, I got all day, man. I want to hear your story.
So I meet this girl. She invites me to church. I meet this girl. She confronts. I'm not, my badness doesn't get to disqualify me from the kingdom, or it doesn't define my identity. And really, like her understanding of the gospel, and really like her relationship with Jesus was so redemptive and healing for me, because she looked me in the eye, and something that I thought to be very true. Like I believed I was like forever going to be the guy who did porn. Like I did that. This is what I've done. I've written, my future. This is just going to be true about me.
Your story's in concrete.
Yeah. And she was like, well, those things might be true about you, but that's not who you are. Like, you're not doing porn now even. Like, that's not your name. Like, what are you talking about? And just so confidently. And, I hear the gospel and respond to it, and the weight and the guilt and the shame that was lifted off of my shoulders. And not just from doing porn, but from feeling I should be ashamed because there's a father that doesn't want me. So I felt unwanted. So I was like struggling with that, but all that was lifted off of me.
Wow.
But what I had yet to experience was God's love.
Yeah.
So like when I became a father, and as my wife loved me, like those two things really were healing for me. But to answer your question, so anything
that part, I love that you just told us that.
Well, just because like so many people ask me like, well, how did your wife deal with your past? Well, she believes that the Bible is true. So if 2 Corinthians 5:17 is real, I don't know that guy.
Yeah.
Like the person that did those things, he was dead.
Yeah.
This person I know is alive.
Yeah. Like, don't you think, I have so many times dwelt on that idea that I've been crucified with Christ and I no longer live.
Yeah.
And when I first heard that passage, I thought, ooh, man, I've got to figure out how to be crucified with Christ, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh my gosh, what a relief.
Yeah.
Like, I've been crucified with Christ. This old shame, I'm bad.
Yeah.
No longer. It's my story. Like, that's dead. It's not a scripture of like, figure out how to die. It's a scripture of, hey, dude, you get to die. It's such a relief, and now you can be recreated and start a different life.
And then Romans 8:1 is true.
Yeah.
Like, therefore there was no condemnation in Christ Jesus.
Oh, I love that. That's
So
true.
and
No condemnation.
Yeah.
Don't you think, well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the sexual stuff of our lives are the hardest
Sure.
to believe that there is no condemnation?
Yeah, I think because we've made a God out of them.
Yes.
And we've tried to replace God with sex.
Yeah. Isn't that true?
So like when anything you make an idol out of, you'll worship. So we've worshiped sex to the point where we've replaced, God, where God goes in our life.
That is such an interesting thought, because I wonder even if we do it like let's say a woman's been raped, and like bad things happen to her body that she did not ask for.
Right.
Right. She was a victim, and those things happened to her.
Yeah.
And yet she can feel like, I'm bad.
Yeah. I think there's that intimacy, because I mean, sex is supposed to be a picture of oneness with God.
Yes.
And like, while that's true, if it's misconstrued the way that you process it, you'll see it wrongly.
It's that idea in 1 Corinthians, right? That says sex is more than skin on skin.
Yeah.
It's a deep spiritual mystery.
Yeah. That's why it talks about how it's, sexual morality being like a sin against your own body.
Yeah.
But so I think in a real way, because it's so tightly connected to the way that you're supposed to experience, the totality of God's love.
Totally.
When you experience it in a way that you're not designed to experience it, it leaves a wound, and that out of that wound flows how you perceive yourself.
The story we start telling ourselves about ourselves.
And that's the dangerous thing about a lie. The dangerous thing about a lie is if you believe it to be true, it's true to you.
Psychology is now realizing that it's not. I mean, what happened, I don't want to dismiss any trauma that anybody has.
Yeah.
But it's what's more significant is this story we start telling ourselves
Yeah.
about the trauma that happened.
Yeah, I mean, myself included, like, I made a God out of my trauma.
Yeah.
And I worshiped it.
Yeah.
And because I worshiped it, in which
Right.
my identity flowed from it.
Oh, see, I think we can make a God out of our traumas.
Yeah.
And then they still, idols require everything and give nothing.
Yeah.
And so this trauma is still requiring so much of our emotional energy.
Yeah. And even when we know God,
Yeah.
there's these traumas that we'll have, and we'll see God through those traumas, and we'll create something that looks like God, but it's not. So like in
Totally.
Exodus, like 33,
Yeah.
when Moses is on the mountain and comes down and they've created the golden calf, they were calling the golden calf Yahweh.
Wow.
They were worshiping what they perceived to be
Yeah.
a good thing. They were doing what they perceived to be a good thing, but it was viewed through a wrong lens.
Wow. How many times do we do that because of the lens of our trauma? And it's why I've given like the last 2 decades of my life helping people with trauma.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, for me, I know my trauma just created these lenses. And so I couldn't see God properly, even though I loved him and I
Yeah.
was a believer, but they still were clouding my lens.
Yeah.
And clouding how I saw myself and felt about myself. I remember one time, like, I think I was like 30, and I looked in the mirror, and I'd been kind of thinking about that passage that I was to love myself as I loved others. And I'd think, well, God, I love loving other people. And I'm looking in the mirror one day, and I'm like, okay, it's time for a moment of honesty. And it's like, but I don't love me.
Yeah.
I still have a lot of self-hatred. And I'm like, God, there's something wrong with that, isn't there? Right?
Yeah. And I think like if you can get to that place,
Yeah.
you can ask yourself an even deeper question.
Yes.
Who do I believe God to be?
Yeah.
And if I'm seeing myself through the lens of self-hatred, like, am I truly, like, am I, the master of my fate? And,
Right.
is God sovereign, or is he not?
Or is it just more of that working out our salvation?
Sure.
And coming to know him. I mean, like for me, like I've been a Christian for a long time now, and it just keeps like, God keeps becoming dearer and dearer and sweeter and sweeter.
Yeah.
It's kind of like marriage.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, the day we got married, I thought, I could never love you more than I love you today.
Yeah.
But like, we're getting close to our 50th, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I had no idea
And that's why
what I was loving
Yeah.
at 18 compared to what I love now.
Yeah.
And I think that's how God has been with me. It's like this sweet unfolding, because he knows what I'm ready for,
Yeah.
right? Like if Ron and I shared the kind of love we share now, when we first got married, neither one of us would have known what the heck to do with it. You know what I mean? But now we do.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of how God's grace is. Like,
Yeah.
I know what you're ready for.
Yeah.
And when you're ready, we will do this growth together. I believe there's seasons of growth and seasons of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever feel that way? Like,
Oh, 100%.
like God will do all this work in your life, and then it's kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And now you need a season of comfort.
Yeah.
And let's enjoy. And there's going to be more
Sometimes
growth.
that's hard to do.
Yeah, isn't it? Just, okay, it's time to chill.
Yeah, because like, back to the question you asked me, that I just went off on a tangent, I think.
Oh, no, I probably did.
But you were asking me how I got from
Yes,
being informed
thank
to
you.
being to preaching. But I had this mentality, which if redeemed and repurposed, it can be for good. Where I fell in love with something. The thing that I fell in love with was the Bible, and it started to transform me. Because I mean, that's the thing. Like, people are always like, "Well, how did your life change?" Well, like, Jesus saved my life. The Bible changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I believed it to be true, and Jesus said, "Not a dot, not an iota of my word will pass away until it's all fulfilled." So I'm like, okay, I trust Jesus is who he says he is, so I'm going to trust that the Bible's going to do what he said it will do, and it started to transform me. And I think, well, in my life, whether it's fitness or buttermilk biscuits, that my grandma used to make, like whatever it is, that I love and enjoy, I want to give those things to others. So like for me, it's like, man, I want other people to know and experience this. So went on that journey. I fell in love with learning it. Then I wanted to be able to teach it, and I thought like, okay, well, I need to know more about it. So go to Liberty, study Christian ministries, and focused on biblical theology. And it's just like the thing I love about biblical theology is like everything points to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So that's just like it sounds complicated, but it's really simplistic in that. So and I wanted to give that to others, and God started opening doors for me to share my story, and then he started opening doors for me to teach and preach, and I've been doing that for about 5-6 years.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
The good news, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the gospel is.
Yeah.
Just good news, right?
Yeah.
So I love that you're sharing the good news of how God has totally transformed your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say,
go ahead.
I was just thinking about something where I think it would be so beneficial for, we were talking about how you respond to things are so important. And like things have transpired throughout my life where like things have come to the surface. And I love the way Paul talks about this, about silver, where, the way that you get silver to be, beautiful, and, where you can see your reflection in it, where there's, this purity. It's, you put it under fire. Whatever word, like the impurities.
The impurities
come to the surface, and you sift them away. But what's much easier is when those things come to the surface, to push them back down. And as I've grown and experienced this journey, a lot of people ask me, how, like, and my wife, like, well, how did she get over what you did? And it was her faith and her trust in Jesus and her belief in the Bible to be true. Like, she never looked back. Like, she never judged me for who I used to be, even as I was beginning to heal and, remembering things and things coming to the surface and rehashing things and, going through, counseling where things I had suppressed came to the surface. Just abuse and all sorts of things.
The trauma.
For me, like, getting to this place where, like, I would say the day that my life changed was like big, like, and you'll go through like progressive life change, but there's these like these marks of levels of consecration that God gives you the opportunity to kind of put it all on the threshing floor and deal with it, and then all of a sudden you become someone you wouldn't have been otherwise. I was in Dallas for the first time, and the first time I met Tim, actually, it was the first day I met Tim, and I told Tim Ross, I said, hey, I feel like God's been wanting me to build a boat. Like, and I don't know what it means, but like I needed to do something. I needed to create something. And Tim's response was, well, what if you're the boat? What if God wanted to do something in you and through you, not you to accomplish something, because that's old thinking. And it just changed everything for me. And then that night, I woke up around like 2 a.m. and felt prompted to pray. And I started to pray, and God was like, no, out of bed. I was like, okay, it's like, and I'm on my knees, praying. It's like, no, on your face. And I'm on my face praying, and like really this thought of, you've confessed your sin to me very vaguely. You've actually blamed everything you've ever done on your dad. It was, if he had been there, I wouldn't have done that. So sure, I did it, but that's the thing with confession. It's like, it's easy to confess enough to get off the hook. What's difficult is to put it all out there. And I was like, you're right. Like, upon my own volition, I did these things. And man, he met me in that place. And it was dirty and nasty, and then all of a sudden it was beautiful and so freeing. And brought things like to the forefront of my mind that I begged that I would never remember, but he met me there.
On the threshing floor,
Yeah,
where we wrestle it out with God.
yeah,
Man, I love that story. I so identify with you. One night when I was pregnant with our first, it was Halloween night. We lived in this little, well, we called it our honeymoon shack. My kids later called it a dump. You know what I mean? All right? We were young and broke.
Yeah.
Got married at 18. And the neighbor guys had come dressed up scary and came over and scared me. Like, they
gosh.
scared me. And my husband was gone. He was at school. And I'm just laying on the bed crying and saying, God, this is all my dad's fault. And God said to me, I mean, really, same, like, God, this is all my dad's fault. I don't even know what the everything was, but it just, everything was his fault.
Yeah.
And God said to me, Nancy, do you want to become an adult? And I'm like, so I started listing all the ways that I was being an adult.
Yeah. Like, let me prove my case to you.
Let's reason this out.
Yeah.
Like, we're two attorneys here. We're
Yeah.
you know. And then it was so sweet because I told him all the ways I was an adult, and God just said to me again, hey, Nancy, do you want to become an adult? And I was humbled that time when he asked me.
Yeah.
And something gave way inside of me. And I said, yes, God. And he said, then you're going to have to stop blaming your dad and own your own life.
Yeah.
And own all of it. I'm like, wow.
And that's like, yeah.
Right, Josh?
And when you're willing to let go.
Yeah.
Because I think it's easy to look at trauma like this is something that was hurtful. It happened to me. Someone deserves to pay for it.
Yeah. Right.
But really, you continue to walk with a limp.
You do. It holds you.
And you walk with a limp for so long, you forget that you have it.
It just becomes second nature. And it has such a grip on us.
Yeah.
I remember when I was really working through, because I'd practiced what I ended up calling later fake forgiveness all through my 20s.
Yeah.
If I'd have a bad memory, I'd just say, I forgive, right? Moving on. And so I wanted to learn what's genuine forgiveness, which included a lot of grief work.
Yeah.
Really coming to terms with what really happened and grieving it deeply and profoundly. But then God just said, I said, okay, God, I really want to forgive my dad all the way.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be fake. I don't want to be superficial. I don't want to do this 500 times a day.
Yeah.
I want something genuine to happen in me. And God just said, then you're going to have to stop being the judge and the jury.
Yeah.
And the executioner. And I'm like, ooh, ouch.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to take grace to forgive.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, Lord, you're right.
And humility.
Yeah. And then the Lord said to me, hey, everything your dad did you know that you were perfectly capable of doing?
Sure.
As a human, you are capable of every sin under the sun.
Yeah.
And again, I had my moment. I must be argumentative.
Yeah.
and I'm like, God, I never ...
Yeah.
Right? And God said, yeah, you're capable of every sin under the sun, Nancy.
Sure.
And so I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. And then forgiveness just came.
Yeah.
Because I'd stopped putting myself in, kind of being the self-righteous judge.
Yeah.
Like I'm entitled to this. And it's like, no, you're not.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I would want people to understand is that when you're willing to humble yourself and extend that forgiveness, truly forgive the deep, dark, uncomfortable things, it actually is so freeing for you because you are the one holding the burden.
Oh, it's like they say drinking poison, what is it, drinking poison hoping it'll kill them is killing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I went through that process, and that was about 3 years ago. And when I finished my book, the way that I close my book is I write an apology letter to my dad.
Oh, I love that. That's so sweet.
Because to your point, it's like if if I got a girl pregnant when I was 16 years old, like I
Terrifying.
absolutely
Yeah,
could see myself of doing the same thing.
sure.
I'm
It's
terrified,
terrifying.
you
Yeah.
know. And then at the same time, the the grudge that I held with him was that he was right there. Like, why don't you want me?
Yeah, come close to me.
And then how ashamed he probably felt.
Unworthy of you by then.
Yeah.
Ah,
And the longer that happens, the deeper that guilt feels.
I remember one day my dad was probably 80 and he'd become a Christian. And I'm like, Dad, today's the day. And he's like, what day is it? Like, today's the day you forgive yourself.
Wow.
You know, because he got to the place where he could admit he was a really bad dad. And I'm like, Dad, this guilt is just keeping you and I from having a genuine, authentic relationship.
Yeah.
All we can talk about is grandkids and the weather.
Yeah.
I want to know you and I want you to know me.
Wow.
And so we stayed on the phone for like an hour and a half. I'm like, Dad? And he's like, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm like, yes, you can. In Christ, you can forgive yourself
Yeah.
for all the past. I have forgiven you. Now would you please forgive you?
Yeah.
So we can have a relationship. And then my dad died at 83, but for those last 3 years, we had such a sweet,
Wow.
sweet relationship.
That's really encouraging for me.
Yeah, it's really sweet. I had a daddy
Because I
for
think
3
for
years. You know,
I think
we're
for
never too old for him.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, never too old.
I think for a lot of people, sometimes in situations like that, if reconciliation doesn't line up with your expectations,
Yeah.
like it can actually hold you back or keep you in that place of unforgiveness.
Totally.
Or then now you're frustrated at God or frustrated even more
Yeah.
because it, like for me, we haven't got to that place where it is, arbitrary conversation every time we've met.
Yeah.
Or we've seen each other or talk on the phone. It's like it's always, a birthday and it's how are the kids,
Yeah.
the weather, what
Yeah.
I'm doing.
We keep it superficial to keep it safe.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so it was so sweet that God gave me the gift of helping him forgive himself.
yeah,
Because I'd done so much forgiveness, and just let it all go and it didn't seem to matter anymore.
that's powerful.
Yeah, like God had
Yeah,
transformed
thank you
it
for
all.
sharing that. That's
Yeah,
that's really
yeah.
encouraging.
It always makes me cry.
It's almost-
Cry baby.
Yeah,
Quick pause.
Yeah.
I know you got something at 12.
Oh, how are we?
I do too.
Okay.
We both got a jet.
What time is
But
it?
y'all are.
Yeah.
You can still do a closer.
Okay, good.
We're at an hour and 6 minutes.
Okay.
So if y'all can just, whatever you
Okay.
want to do to wrap up.
Okay.
That was like,
Okay.
JB literally whispered to me, he's like, this is a good closer.
Oh, gosh.
Nancy's crying.
We got Nancy crying.
yeah,
Ah, okay. I'll try to
Yeah.
collect myself here. Yeah, this is such a sweet interaction. Okay, to close, dear Lord, I could talk to you for 3 days, and I want your wife to come next time. Next time, look at,
Yeah.
I've already got you on the calendar.
there you go.
Okay, so do we just go?
You can just go into the
Okay.
closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a few things that have really struck me about your story. And one I really want wives to hear, or even girlfriends, is that your wife was able to hold on to herself and her faith and her beliefs and not own your story. You know what I mean? But be that partner. That, woman means Ezer, which means helper, warrior.
Yeah,
And she was like that warrior for you. She warred for you.
yeah,
And, we have these mirror neurons. And she's conveying, that's the old you, that's gone. That's
Yeah.
not the man I am falling in love with.
yeah. It makes me think of that verse in Ecclesiastes, that cord of three.
Yeah.
And within that cord of three, I become someone I've never been, and so does she.
So if we were to talk to women whose husbands are like so addicted to porn,
Yeah,
which I've probably in my lifetime worked with over 1,000 sex addicts, probably way more than that.
Yeah.
And every time I listen to a man's story who's really hooked into the world of porn,
Yeah.
he has a story of trauma, and he hasn't dealt with his trauma.
Yeah.
And then the wives can start feeling unloved,
Yeah.
uncared for, unseen, unknown, unwanted.
Yeah.
And then she can start to believe also that I've got to cure this for him.
Yeah.
Maybe I caused this. Maybe I'm not pretty enough, sexy enough,
Yeah.
desirable enough. What would you say to those wives, or what might your wife say?
Yeah, I would say that the porn addiction
Yeah.
is not your fault.
No, it's not.
And it's not indicative of you lacking something or
Yeah.
not being something.
You're not. Yeah. It's not that you're not
It-
enough.
It's because a pornography addiction flows from a wound or a trauma, and it's really tied to an identity crisis.
Yeah.
And they're trying to fill a gap in their identity with something. And yes, there's the neurological aspect of like the habitual addiction,
Totally.
but really they're trying to heal something externally that needs to be
Yes.
fixed internally.
I always believe, because I've heard so many men's stories, I believe that they're trying to heal an attachment wound
Sure.
that goes so deep. It can go pre-verbal.
And it doesn't cost you anything.
No.
What I mean by that is I can obtain the affirmation and the counterfeit intimacy
Yeah.
without the fear of rejection.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to reject me, and you're not going to hold me to any expectations. I can withdraw that experience and those feelings from that interaction. What feels like an engagement with some type of intimacy, and get that dopamine hit that feels some sort of way.
That's so true.
But it's never going to last.
It's not.
Because it's not real.
It's that false intimacy. And, adults need attachment as desperately as infants do.
Yeah.
And so we all were made for genuine connection, intimacy, attachment, bonding. And if we don't know what the genuine looks like, then the counterfeit can look so appealing.
Yeah.
But it leads us to more death and destruction and harm
Yeah.
to ourselves and others. So, well, Joshua, it has been a delight.
Yeah, for me too.
We could talk for days. I really want to meet your amazing wife
Yeah.
who shared a part. I think we need to think of our brains as an us.
Yeah.
And she gave you enough of her faith and her belief
Yeah.
and her positive
Yeah.
beliefs that
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power in a name, and
So much power.
Her name's Hope. So
no way.
yeah.
Hope and Joshua.
Yeah.
How great is that?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, my friend, my new friend,
Yeah, absolutely.
for being my guest
Yeah,
today.
thank you.
I feel very honored to have had you in this time together.